Welcome to the Whispering Archives, where forgotten voices speak, carrying pain, deep secrets, and cold, hard truths. Pull up a chair and listen closely. My name is Amaryllis Vance. I just turned 28. On December 24th, 2025, right in the teeth of a brutal Colorado blizzard, I was driving my old Subaru down I-70 from Denver to Vail. A commercial snowplow lost traction on the black ice, jackknifed across the median, and absolutely obliterated the driver's side of my car. Shattered collarbone, 2 collapsed lungs, a hairline fracture running down my skull. The trauma surgeon at Vail Valley Medical Center pulled my emergency contact file. He dialed my father's number and placed his phone beside the metal tray beside my ear. Through the heavy fog of fentanyl, I heard the surgeon's voice crack with panic. "Mr. Vance, your daughter is being rushed to the OR. She might not make it through the night. You need to get here immediately." My father's voice filtered through the tiny speaker. It was flat, utterly inconvenienced. "We're hosting the firm's Christmas gala. 80 partners are arriving in an hour. Call us back if she expires." The surgeon froze. He stared at the phone as if it had bitten him. The silence in the trauma bay was deafening. I stared up at the blinding fluorescent lights and realized something simple. Dying alone isn't a metaphor. It's just cold. I woke up 2 days later in the surgical ward. The operation was over. The sterile room was completely bare. No balloons, no anxious family members sleeping in uncomfortable chairs. Just a hospital financial administrator standing at the foot of my bed. She held a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. "A woman in a dark green trench coat covered your entire balance, even the life flight copter. She left this. She told me you shouldn't open it until you're safely back in your own apartment." I had absolutely no idea who this stranger was, but the documents hiding inside that heavy envelope would completely shatter the reality I grew up in. They proved I was never the burden my parents spent 14 years convincing me I was. Before I dig into that, I want to ask a small favor. If this story hits close to home, or if you just feel something while listening, leave a like and subscribe. Only do it if you mean it. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're listening from and the exact time on your clock right now. I sit down and read every single one of them. Let me drag you back to where the lies started, back when I still bought into the myth that blood makes you family. I work overnight shifts at the Safe Harbor Youth Shelter in downtown Denver, 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. I sit with runaway teens who have nowhere else to hide. Most of the time, I manage 20 kids at once. They show up bruised, terrified, and convinced the whole world has turned their back on them. Sometimes they just cry in the dark. Sometimes they flinch if you walk past them too quickly. I make them hot chocolate. I sit on the floor outside their dorm doors. I make damn sure they know somebody is staying awake to keep them safe. I've worked at the shelter for 4 years. I rent a damp basement apartment in Aurora for $1,500 a month. It's exactly 400 square feet. It's just me and my plants. I take home about $60,000 a year. By the time I pay rent, my absurd student loans, and basic groceries, I'm scraping the bottom of my checking account. But I'm used to the quiet. I know how to survive on my own. My younger sister, Clara, lives in an entirely different universe. She's 24. She works as a corporate acquisitions director in Chicago and lives in a massive penthouse with her husband, a plastic surgeon, and their newborn daughter, Chloe. My parents, Richard and Evelyn Vance, live in a sprawling gated estate in Boulder. They're both pushing 60. They've been married for 30 decades. Since the day I learned to walk, Clara was the golden child who never took a wrong step. I was the disappointment they couldn't hide. Clara married into old money at 22. I'm 28, single and exhausted. Clara gave them a granddaughter. I give them something to sigh about. Clara flies home constantly. I live an hour away and they treat me like a total stranger. Last Christmas was the final time I subjected myself to their holiday dinner. My mother spent 20 minutes bragging about Clara closing a corporate merger and 10 showing off pictures of baby Chloe in designer clothes. Nobody asked about my shelter. Nobody asked about the kids. When my father finally acknowledged my existence, he used it as a punchline. Clara is securing the future of global tech infrastructure, he declared, pouring a bourbon. It's a bit different than handing out used coats to runaways, Amaryllis. I keep children from freezing to death on the street, I shot back, my hand shaking. He looked at me with total exhaustion. Sure, but Clara actually has a real career trajectory. I should have walked out and never looked back, but some pathetic, lingering hope made me drive up there again this year. I genuinely thought they might finally love me. I was an idiot. What I never brought up at that dinner table was the actual beginning. The pattern started when I was 14. I woke up with a searing, blinding pain in my lower abdomen. I dragged myself into the kitchen, sweating and crying. "Mom, something is ripping inside me," I gasped. She didn't even look up from her iPad. "Stop performing, Amaryllis. It's just a stomach bug." "Mom, please." "Amaryllis, stop it." "You always exaggerate everything, Amaryllis. Clara never makes a fuss like this." 7 hours passed. My appendix burst. The infection spilled into my abdomen and the surgeons had to slice me open at midnight to save my life. When my parents finally strolled into the recovery ward the next morning, my father immediately crossed his arms. "Why on earth didn't you say it was an actual emergency?" I was 14, pumped full of morphine and crying. "I begged you to listen to me." "You need to articulate your symptoms better," my mother snapped, casually adjusting her expensive silk scarf. "We can't just guess what you're feeling." There were 0 apologies. They flipped the script instantly, turning my agonizing medical emergency into a failure of my communication skills. They pulled the exact same trick when I turned 19. I was away at my college dorm. A blinding migraine hit me so hard the room actually spun. The cheap overhead lights felt like hot needles piercing my retinas. I couldn't stop throwing up into a plastic trash can. I called my mother, shaking and sweating. "Mom, I need someone to take me to the ER right now." "Amaryllis, you're just panicking over your midterm exams. Everyone gets tension headaches. Do not waste our insurance deductible on an unnecessary urgent care visit." I literally can't see straight. "Drink a glass of water and go to sleep. You're putting on a show." I dragged myself into an off-campus urgent care clinic entirely alone. The diagnosis was a severe optical migraine complicated by dangerous dehydration. A nurse hooked me up to an IV and pushed aggressive anti-nausea medication directly into my veins. The out-of-pocket medical bill came to $450. I quietly drained my miserable coffee shop savings account to cover the cost and never breathed a single word of it to my family. When I hit 23, I fractured my shin bone training for a local charity 5K. I called my father, fighting back intense tears. "I think my leg is really broken." "You lack basic discipline, Amaryllis. Clara hiked the Rockies last summer without a single blister. Put a bag of ice on it and walk it off." I hobbled into an orthopedic clinic by myself the next morning. The x-rays confirmed a massive stress fracture. I spent 8 miserable weeks hauling around a heavy walking boot. When my parents finally noticed the cast during a brief video call, my father sneered. "Well, if you bothered to learn how to run correctly like your sister, you wouldn't be in this mess." By my mid-20s, I learned the golden rule of my family: never bleed in front of them, because every single time I showed a wound, they found a reason why I deserved it. That is exactly why they dismissed the panicked trauma surgeon that night. They had spent a lifetime training themselves to ignore my emergencies. But my physical injuries weren't the only things they successfully conditioned me to keep quiet about. There was also my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He died 3 years ago, right before Christmas, 2022. I had absolutely no idea his heart was failing. I didn't know he was fading away in a sterile hospice bed until a full week after they put him in the frozen ground, which, naturally, I was banned from attending. My parents casually mentioned he passed away in his sleep and that they held a tiny, private memorial service, just the immediate inner circle. When I screamed at them over the phone, demanding to know why nobody bothered to call me, my mother sounded bored. "You work those ridiculous night shifts at the shelter, sweetie. We didn't want to interrupt your precious charity work." I had completely given up asking about Arthur years before he actually died. When I was 13, he just vanished. He used to bring me carved wooden horses. He always showed up to my terrible middle school plays. And then, abruptly, his chair at the dining room table stayed empty. I asked my dad where Grandpa went. "He forgot his place in this house," my father said, his eyes firmly locked on his newspaper. "He crossed a line and he's done here." I didn't comprehend what that meant as a young kid. I assumed I had broken a rule and drove him away. I assumed Grandpa just grew tired of me. As the years stacked up, I fully convinced myself he just moved on to a better life without me in it. It tore me up inside. But you swallow a lot of sharp pills when you're a teenager with nowhere else to go. What I didn't realize, what I wouldn't uncover until much later, was that Arthur Vance never walked away. He fought like hell to reach me. But I'm jumping ahead of the timeline again. Let's go back to the morning of the car crash, December 24th, 2025. I rolled out of bed at 9 a.m. in my freezing basement apartment. I had just clocked out of the youth shelter an hour ago. My eyes burned from deep exhaustion. I desperately needed a full day of sleep, but I had to beat the holiday traffic up the mountain. My phone vibrated on the nightstand at 10:45. A text from my mother. "What is your exact ETA? The private caterers arrive at 4. No, be careful on the ice. No, drive safe. Just a cold schedule demand." I pulled my Subaru out of Denver at 11:15. The 90-mile trek up the mountain usually takes an hour and a half, but during a blinding blizzard on Christmas Eve, it turns into a complete nightmare. I-70 was already a parking lot, tires spinning out in the heavy slush, red taillights bleeding through the dense whiteout conditions. I gripped the freezing steering wheel and lied to myself. I told myself things would magically be different this year. I hoped they would ask about my shelter kids. I hoped they would notice the dark circles under my eyes and tell me to rest. I just wanted them to look at me like I actually belonged at their table. At 1:27 p.m., right near the treacherous Georgetown Bend, it happened. The massive commercial snowplow materialized out of the thick whiteout. Huge, unstoppable, skidding completely out of control across the median. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal, but the tires just locked up on a solid sheet of black ice. There was absolutely nowhere to go. The plow obliterated my driver's side door. The horrific sound of tearing metal deafened me as my car whipped violently across 3 lanes of traffic.
The airbag exploded against my face. Shattered window glass rained down the back of my neck. Then, the absolute agony hit. Searing, visceral. Every breath felt like chewing on razor blades. I couldn't lift my left arm. My vision swum with dark, heavy spots. I was trapped in the wreckage. A highway patrolman ripped my door open seconds later.
Through the ringing in my ears, a heavy voice pushed past the noise. "Hold still. Medics are 2 minutes out." The absolute last image I have before losing consciousness was my phone screen glowing against the snowy floorboard. Another message from my mother. "Do not forget the rosemary focaccia and try to actually be on time for once." Then complete darkness. I regained consciousness under the blinding glare of surgical lights at Vail Valley Medical Center. Heart monitors screamed in the background. A woman in dark blue scrubs leaned over my face, shining a penlight into my eyes. "Amaryllis, I am Dr. Sarah Chen. You survived a severe collision. You have 2 collapsed lungs, a shattered collarbone, and massive internal hemorrhaging. We are taking you into the operating room immediately. Do you hear me?" I tried to nod. Fire ripped through my chest. "We are dialing your emergency contact right now," she said. My parents. Through the heavy curtain of painkillers, I heard the phone ring on speaker. I heard Dr. Chen's voice, sharp and commanding. "Mr. Vance, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Emergency Trauma Unit. Your daughter Amaryllis was in a catastrophic wreck. She has collapsed lungs and active internal bleeding. She requires surgical intervention within the hour to survive. How fast can you get here?" My father's voice echoed through the tiny speaker. I caught every single syllable. "How much of this is an actual emergency, doctor? Is she going to pass away?" "Sir, she is in critical condition. Without this surgery?" "Look, doctor, I value your time, but my daughter has a long history of severe dramatics. She exaggerates minor inconveniences. If her life is genuinely ending, obviously we will drive down. But we have 80 firm partners arriving for our Christmas gala at 6. Dr. Chen did not waver. Her tone turned to ice. "Mr. Vance, your daughter has nearly a liter of blood pooling in her chest cavity. Her breathing is completely compromised. This is not a performance. This is massive physical trauma." Then came my mother's voice in the background, loud and perfectly clear. "Richard, tell the doctor we will come if she expires. We are not canceling the annual gala for another one of Amaryllis's temper tantrums." Silence stretched across the trauma bay. My father finally cleared his throat. "Doctor, we will come if she takes a turn for the worse. If she is actually dying, call my cell again. Otherwise, we will call her after the holidays wrap up." Another brutal pause. When Dr. Chen spoke again, the professional warmth was completely gone. "Understood. We are taking her to surgery." She terminated the call. I watched her wipe her eye with the back of her wrist. I watched a trauma nurse turn his face to the wall. That was the exact moment I stopped hoping. Dying alone is not some poetic concept. It is just a busy hospital room where nobody knows your middle name. They pushed my bed into the operating theater at 2:38 p.m. The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10. I made it to 8. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles and wondering if they would even bother to show up to my funeral, or if they would just send an intern with a floral arrangement. I woke up 2 days later at 12:51 p.m. on December 26th. The operation took 5 brutal hours. They fixed the internal bleeding, repaired the lung tissue, and bolted my collarbone back together. I woke up tethered to a chest tube and 4 different IV bags. The recovery room was entirely vacant. No terrible hospital gift shop balloons, no awkward greeting cards, no family members. A visitor log hung on a plastic clipboard at the foot of my bed. It listed my name at the top. Below that, the lines were completely blank. 0 signatures. My cracked phone sat on the rolling tray. I grabbed it with my right hand since my left side was totally immobilized. 3 missed calls. All from Clara. I played the voicemails. Hey, Amaryllis, just checking on the focaccia. Mom is getting stressed. People are eating, so I guess you bailed again. Call me later. Okay, so Mom is furious you skipped Christmas Eve. Could you at least text her an apology? I locked the screen. A nurse walked in. Her badge read Elena. You opened your eyes, she said, her voice soft. That is a huge relief. How is the pain? Everywhere, I whispered.
Elena checked my monitors. She glanced at the empty visitor log, and I saw her jaw tighten. Do you want me to call anyone for you? She asked. I shook my head. After she walked out, I just stared at the blank wall. I thought about my mother saying they would come if I expired. 80 guests were drinking champagne in their living room, and not a single one cared if I survived the night. I spent 3 days in the surgical ward. Elena took care of me most of the time. She talked about her rescue dogs and her horrible ex-husband, explicitly avoiding the topic of my empty room. On the 3rd afternoon, a woman from the financial department knocked on the door. Her name was Maria. She looked exhausted but kind. Miss Vance, I need to discuss your account, Maria said. I shut my eyes. I did not have 6 figures. I barely had $1,000 in my checking account. It is zeroed out, Maria said gently. I looked at her. What? An older gentleman showed up on Christmas night, very well dressed, wearing a dark green trench coat. He sat down with administration and paid the entire balance, $140,000. A cashier's check cleared this morning. Who? He refused to give me his name, but he left this for you. She handed me a heavy, dark mahogany box. It was tied with rough twine. Under the knot was a small card. The handwriting was familiar. Do not open until you are safely home. You are not alone. A.
Who was he? I asked, my throat tight. Maria shook her head. I really don't know, but his hands were shaking, and he looked like he had been crying for hours. I kept that mahogany box on my lap for the rest of my hospital stay. It was the only object in the entire building that felt like it belonged to me. They discharged me on January 2nd. The surgeon handed me a stack of papers. No lifting anything over 5 pounds. Return in 2 weeks for x-rays. Go straight to the ER if I spiked a fever. I just nodded blindly. An orderly wheeled me to the sliding glass doors. I ordered a rideshare back to Aurora. It cost me $210. The driver hauled my duffel bag to the front door. I had to climb down a steep flight of concrete stairs to reach my basement apartment. I took it one agonizing step at a time, gripping the icy handrail with my good arm, holding the wooden box tight against my ribs. Every single breath tasted like copper. I felt like my bones were grinding together. When I finally unlocked my door, I set the mahogany box on my cheap laminate kitchen counter. I stared at it until the sun went down. I did not untie the twine. Not that night. Not for another 2 weeks. Because I was terrified. Not of the objects inside, but the reality those objects would force me to face. Because the truth was undeniable.
If a stranger cared enough to drop $140,000 just to keep my lungs pumping, it meant my parents always had the power to save me. They simply chose not to. During those 2 agonizing weeks alone in my basement, they never reached out, not a single text checking on my breathing. Clara finally texted me on January 5th. "Mom is annoyed. Are you coming to the New Year's brunch or what?" I stared at the screen and threw the phone onto the couch. On January 7th, my mother actually dialed my number. I let it ring until it hit voicemail. "Amaryllis, pick up," her recorded voice echoed in my quiet kitchen. "Clara said you might have gotten into a fender bender on the mountain. If that actually happened, you should have called us instead of acting mysterious. Anyway, call me back. We need you to confirm your RSVP for the country club dinner." I deleted the audio file immediately. While my shattered collarbone slowly knit itself back together, my mind kept drifting to my grandfather, Arthur. I thought about the specific way he used to look at me before he vanished, like I actually mattered, like I wasn't just a shadow taking up space in my parents' immaculate house. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting on his faded corduroy armchair in his Denver study. He pulled out a heavy, antique silver pocket watch. The mechanical ticking was incredibly loud in the quiet room. He let me hold it in my small hands. "This chronometer has survived 4 generations of our family, Amaryllis," he whispered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Look at the sweeping second hand. It never hesitates. It just pushes forward, steady and absolute, just like time. Just like love." I asked him, "Will you let me keep it when I'm older?" He brushed my hair back. "One day, I promise it will be yours." My father suddenly marched into the study, his jaw tight. "Dad, stop filling her head with that nostalgic garbage. We're leaving. Clara's junior equestrian competition starts in exactly half an hour." My grandfather did not stand up. He just looked at my father with utter calm. Clara has 2 parents cheering in the stands. Amaryllis has me. My father's face flushed dark red. "We are leaving right now." That was the absolute last time I was allowed to sit alone with my grandfather in his own home. He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before my father dragged me out to the car, leaving Arthur sitting alone with his ticking watch. When I turned 12, I earned the solo cello performance for the middle school winter concert. My parents swore they'd be in the front row, but Clara had a sudden minor gymnastics meet across town the exact same evening. Naturally, they went to watch her tumble on a mat instead. My grandfather, however, walked into the auditorium alone. He sat right in the dead center of the front row. When I finished playing my piece, he stood up and clapped so ferociously that the other parents stared at him. After the curtains closed, he found me backstage. He handed me a massive bouquet of yellow lilies and a concert program he made me autograph. "I will always show up for you, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Always." "Why didn't Mom and Dad come?" I asked, looking at the floor. He knelt down, ignoring his bad knees, until we were face to face. "Because their vision is entirely broken. They don't see you the way I do. That is their tragedy, Amaryllis, not yours." Exactly 1 week later, my father formally banned him from attending any of my school events. He claimed Arthur was overstepping his bounds. The worst memory hit me when I was 13. I was sitting on my bedroom floor trying to finish a math worksheet when the shouting started downstairs. It was violently loud. I crept to the top of the stairs and heard my grandfather roaring at my dad. "Richard, you are destroying her. You compare her to Clara every single day. You make that poor girl feel like she is completely worthless." "Mind your own business," my father snapped back. "She is my daughter to raise." "And he is my granddaughter," Arthur fired back. I refuse to sit quietly in the corner while you break her spirit." "Then don't sit here at all," my father screamed. "Get out of my house. You are entirely done here." The heavy oak front door slammed so hard the walls rattled. I ran back to my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had no idea what they were actually fighting about. I just assumed it was my fault. For 15 long years, I genuinely believed my grandfather walked away because I was too difficult to love. On January 16th, exactly 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I finally pulled the rough twine off the mahogany box.
It was nearly midnight. The freezing Colorado wind rattled my basement windows. I lifted the heavy wooden lid. Resting on top of a stack of documents was the antique silver pocket watch, Arthur's chronometer, the exact same one I held when I was 8 years old. The silver casing was tarnished, but I recognized the faded engraving on the face immediately. My hands shook violently as I lifted it out. Beneath it sat a thick 6-page letter. It was written in blue ink on heavy cream paper. The handwriting was jagged and wildly uneven. He must have been incredibly weak when he forced himself to write it, but it was undeniably his voice. At the very top, the date read November 10th, 2022. The exact month his heart finally gave out. My chest physically ached. Beneath the silver watch lay a thick 6-page letter. It was written in, "My dearest Amaryllis, if you are holding this paper, I am already gone. But I need you to understand one thing before you do anything else. I never left you. Your father legally forced me out of your life when you were 13. You likely do not remember the explosive argument we had in the foyer. I told him he was psychologically ruining you by holding you up against Clara's shadow. He told me to stay out of his family's affairs. I told him you were my family too. That was the absolute last time they allowed me to see your face. But for every single birthday, every Christmas morning, and your high school graduation, I wrote you letters. I sent you packages. Your parents ensured you never touched a single one. I know this because every box came back marked return to sender. I kept every single rejected envelope. My attorney, Elias, has them all in his vault. I ended up hiring a private investigator, not to invade your privacy, Amaryllis, but simply to keep you breathing. I instructed him to exclusively monitor the public hospital grids and emergency dispatch logs in your zip code. When a severe medical emergency hit, the system automatically alerted Elias. It was my only way of staying in the room when your parents locked me out. When you moved out to work at the youth shelter, I established an anonymous trust fund. That money you received, your father lied and told you it was a corporate loan. It was not. It was my money, slipped through a channel your parents could not intercept or control. I hate that I had to operate like a ghost in your life. I hate that I had to hide in the shadows. But I would rather be your invisible guardian than lose you completely. I have watched you from afar. I know you work the brutal overnight shifts in Denver to keep those runaway kids safe. You grew into the fierce, compassionate woman I always knew you would be. I am dying right now. Terminal pancreatic cancer. I begged your parents to let you visit my hospice bed. They told me you were too busy with your charity work to be bothered. I am leaving you the estate, my entire savings, and the silver chronometer, because you are the only person who understood what family actually means. Elias was ordered to wait until you desperately needed saving. Live your life. I needed to make absolutely certain that you would never be abandoned when the floor finally dropped out from beneath you.
The man who brought this box to the hospital, my attorney, Elias Thorne, will explain the rest of the logistics. But Amaryllis, you must understand one thing. You were deeply, fiercely loved, and you were never, not for a single second, the problem. Whenever you look down at that silver chronometer, I need you to remember that I was always in the room, even when you couldn't see my shadow. I love you, kiddo. I always will. Grandpa Arthur. I sat on my kitchen floor and read that letter 14 times before the sun came up. By the fourth read, the tears stopped completely. What replaced the grief was a blinding, absolute rage. I was not angry at Arthur. I was furious at the two people who lived in that gated estate in Boulder. The very next item in the box was a heavy black USB drive, a piece of masking tape on the side read in Arthur's shaky handwriting, "For Amaryllis, the truth they buried." I jammed the drive into my laptop. 3 digital folders populated on the screen. The first one was simply titled Emails to Richard. I clicked it open. 92 individual email files, dating from 2010 all the way to 2022.
I opened the oldest file. August 14th, 2010. Amaryllis's 14th birthday. Richard, I understand you have banned me from the house, but it is Amaryllis's birthday today. I just want to take her to a diner for pancakes, just the two of us, for an hour. Please. Dad. There was no reply logged. I clicked on another one randomly. October 22nd, 2017. Richard, Elias told me Amaryllis was accepted into the social work program at CU Denver. I am beyond proud of her. I want to cover her tuition costs. I have established a blind trust. She never even has to know the money came from me. Elias Thorne will manage the transfers. This has nothing to do with our feud. This is about her life. Do not block this. Dad. No reply. I scrolled to the very bottom and opened the final email. November 2nd, 2022. Richard, the oncologist says I have maybe 3 weeks left. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I am not asking for you to forgive me. I am only begging you to let me see Amaryllis one final time, just to say a proper goodbye. Please, I am begging my own son. Dad. This specific email had a response attached. November 3rd, 2022. She is working. Do not contact this family again.
92 desperate emails. 89 ignored entirely. 3 replied to with such venomous cruelty it made my stomach turn. I clicked into the second folder. It was titled Returned_mail. 40 scanned images loaded on my screen. I clicked through them one by one. Sweet 16 birthday cards, high school graduation cards, Christmas letters. Every single envelope bore a heavy red postal stamp, Return to Sender. Every single one was addressed to me at my parents' estate in Boulder. In one scanned image of an open card, I saw his distinct handwriting. Happy 18th, Amaryllis. I think about you every single day. Love, Grandpa. I never touched a single piece of that mail. My chest felt incredibly tight as I clicked on the final folder. It was labeled Audio Notes for Amaryllis. 4 MP3 files. I clicked the first one and cranked up the volume. My grandfather's deep, warm voice echoed off my basement walls. Hey, kiddo, it's Grandpa Arthur. I don't know if this recording will ever reach you. It's your 16th birthday today. 16. I still remember the day you were born. You screamed so loud the nurses joked you had the lungs of an opera singer.
I wanted to take you out for a proper dinner tonight, the audio continued. But your father told me you were tied up with Clara's regional cheer competition. I get it, family stuff, but I wanted you to hear my voice and know I am thinking about you. I bought you a gift, a heavy leather-bound sketchbook. I remember you were always drawing in the margins of your homework. I am going to put it in the mail tomorrow, but honestly, I don't know if they will actually let you have it. If you do get it, and if you ever want to hear my voice, my cell is still 303-555-0188. I will always pick up. Happy birthday, kiddo. The file ended. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I never received a leather-bound sketchbook. I had absolutely no idea he had tried to call. My hands were shaking as I clicked the second audio file. Amaryllis, it's Grandpa. I just got word from Elias that you were accepted into the social work program in Denver. Kiddo, I am so incredibly proud of you. I know we haven't spoken in 6 years. Your father made it abundantly clear I am banned from the property, but I could not let this massive milestone pass without telling you that you are going to change lives. You always had this incredible empathy.
I had Elias set up a financial fund to handle your tuition, Arthur's recorded voice explained. Your father doesn't need to know a damn thing about it. Elias will route the money directly to the university bursar. It will look exactly like an anonymous alumni grant. Do not stress about paying a single cent back. This is my gift to you. I hope you save those kids, Amaryllis. I hope you find happiness. I love you. My number is still 303-555-0188. Please, just call me sometime. I miss you. I slammed my hand down on the spacebar to pause the audio. I couldn't breathe. I distinctly remember sitting at the dining room table when I was accepted into the program. My father looked me dead in the eye and told me that he and my mother had generously taken out a $60,000 Parent Plus loan to cover my tuition. He told me that family requires sacrifice and that my sacrifice would be paying them back every single month after graduation. I had been transferring them $500 a month since 2021. $30,000. I had paid my parents $30,000 for a loan that never existed. They stole my grandfather's gift and charged me for it. I wiped my face and clicked on the third audio file.
Arthur's voice sounded entirely different this time. It was incredibly weak, raspy. Every word sounded like a brutal effort. Amaryllis, it's Grandpa Arthur. I have no idea if Elias will ever be able to get this to you, but I have to put it on record. The oncologist came in today. I don't have much sand left in the hourglass. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's already in my liver. He stopped to cough, a wet, rattling sound that made me flinch. I called your father today. I swallowed my pride and begged him to let me see you one final time, just to look at you and say goodbye. He told me you were too busy. He told me you were building a career and didn't have time to visit an old man you probably didn't even remember. Maybe he was right. Maybe you forgot me. It's been 14 years since we really sat down together. You were just a kid then. You're a woman now, 28 years old, pulling night shifts to keep those street kids safe. I've been keeping track of you, kiddo, not to invade your life, just to know you were okay. I know you work at Safe Harbor. I know you sit on the floor with those teenagers when they can't sleep. I know exactly who you grew up to be."
Arthur's voice cracked violently. I could hear him weeping through the speakers. "I am so sorry I wasn't in the bleachers for you, Amaryllis. I am so sorry I let your father lock the door. I should have kicked it down." More painful coughing echoed through the file. "I left everything with Elias, the mountain cabin, the accounts, and my silver chronometer, the one I let you hold when you were 8. Do you remember that afternoon? You sat in my corduroy chair and I showed you the sweeping second hand, how time just pushes forward relentlessly even when we are begging it to stop. I need you to keep it, not because it is an antique, because holding it means you understood that you were loved. You are loved. You were never the burden, Amaryllis, not for a single minute. Richard and Evelyn, they made you feel microscopic. They made you believe Clara was the only one who mattered. But you were always my absolute favorite thing in this world. Always. I hope you can forgive me for not kicking that door off its hinges to stay in your life. I love you, Amaryllis. I always will. Until my heart stops, and long after. Take care of yourself, kiddo. You deserve some light." The recording cut off. I sat motionless on the cold laminate floor and replayed all 4 files 3 times in a row. By the final playthrough, the tears had completely dried. I was freezing cold. I was entirely focused. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next object in a mahogany box was a stiff leather bank booklet. First Horizon Trust, Denver Branch. Amaryllis Vance Educational Trust. I flipped it open. A stark transaction ledger spanned from 2017 to 2021. 4 precise deposits per academic year. $15,000 per transfer. Total disbursed, $60,000. In the memo margin of every single line, the same handwritten note appeared. For Amaryllis, love, Grandpa Arthur. The final item buried at the bottom of the box was a heavy stock business card. Elias Thorne, attorney at law. Thorne and Associates, Denver, CO. Colorado Bar number 49201. Flipped over, the card bore a handwritten message in sharp black ink. Call me when you find this. Arthur ensured you were protected. E.T. I dialed the number the next morning, January 17th, 10:15 a.m. Elias Thorne? Mr. Thorne, this is Amaryllis Vance. The line went quiet for a moment. Then a warm, deep voice spoke. Amaryllis, I have been waiting by the phone. How are your lungs? The trauma unit said you were healing well. How did you know about the wreck? I asked. Arthur established an active monitoring protocol before his heart gave out. A private firm, Apex Recovery and Investigations, out of Boulder. They passively track public hospital admissions and trauma dispatch logs. When your name hit the Vail Critical Care Registry on Christmas Eve, they flagged me instantly. I drove up the mountain that same night. My chest tightened. My parents, they were legally notified about his passing, weren't they? About the will? Yes. Walk me through the exact timeline. Arthur passed on December 15th, 2022, Elias explained calmly. The final will and testament was recorded in Boulder County Probate Court on January 4th, 2023. All legal parties were formally notified via certified courier, including Richard as the primary next of kin. You were explicitly named as the sole beneficiary. However, your legal address was still listed as their Boulder estate. Richard signed for the courier envelope himself. He never forwarded the contents to you.
I dispatched 3 additional notices throughout the spring. Every single one was signed for by your mother. None reached you. What did he leave me, Elias? Everything.
The entire estate, Elias continued. The mountain cabin on Pine Ridge Road. Current market appraisal is roughly $850,000. Liquid investment portfolios totaling $600,000. The university trust was a separate entity, already completely depleted on your social work degree. He also left all his personal artifacts, including the silver chronometer. Finally, a life insurance payout added another $150,000 to the total. Estimated gross value is roughly $1.6 million. Richard inherited 0, explicitly by design. I let the silence hang on the line for a long time. Amaryllis, Elias said softly, when I got the call from Vale and I saw that empty visitor log at the foot of your bed and the nurses told me what Evelyn said to the trauma surgeon, I realized Arthur was completely correct about them. I ended the call a few minutes later. My hands were no longer shaking. My pulse was incredibly slow and steady. For the first time in 15 years, I possessed absolute proof. Not hunches, not teenage suspicions, cold, time-stamped, legally notarized proof. 5 days later, my mother called again, January 22nd, 6:15 p.m. Amaryllis? Oh, thank God you finally picked up. What do you want, Evelyn? Sweetie, Aunt Margaret just mentioned you were actually hospitalized on the mountain. Why on earth didn't you text us it was serious? We absolutely would have driven up.
The trauma surgeon called you from the OR, I said flatly. You told her you would only come if I expired. A thick silence fell over the line. Amaryllis, you know how you behave. You are always so deeply dramatic about medical inconveniences. We just assumed. I had 2 collapsed lungs and massive internal bleeding. Dr. Chen explicitly told you that over speakerphone. Well, she said, her voice tightening defensively, regardless, we are relieved you survived. Are you attending the winter gala this weekend? I almost smiled. Yes. 2 days later, my father called. Amaryllis, we need to have a serious discussion about your grandfather's legal affairs. There's been a massive error with the Boulder probate judge. Some ambulance chaser attorney is claiming you inherited the Pine Ridge cabin. As his actual son, I should have been. You were legally served the documents in January 2023. Elias Thorne sent 4 certified couriers. You and Evelyn signed for all of them. A heavy pause. Listen to me, he growled. Regardless of a clerical error, we're handling this internally. Arthur's mind was completely gone at the end. He wrote that document weeks before his heart stopped. He was completely lucid. 2 witnesses and a notary signed. Do not act naive, Amaryllis. This is about preserving the family capital. Are you coming to the gala or not? Oh, I'll be there. We can finalize Arthur's estate in front of the entire family. I hung up the phone.
The Winter Gala, January 25th, 2026. I drove my battered rental car up to the Boulder estate. Same winding driveway, same massive iron gates. This time, I actually walked through the front doors. I walked into the massive dining room at 7:30 p.m. The house was packed. 20 extended family members. Aunt Margaret, my mother's cousins from Chicago, Clara, her surgeon husband, and my parents holding court near the fireplace. I was wearing Arthur's silver chronometer on a heavy chain around my neck. Clara spotted it instantly. Is that Grandpa Arthur's antique watch? Yes, I said loudly. He left it to me in his will. Dad specifically told everyone Grandpa died intestate, Clara frowned. Dad lied to you. The room went dead silent.
Dinner was over. Everyone was holding wine glasses in the great room. I waited until every single eye was locked on me. I unzipped my bag and dropped the black USB drive, the 6-page letter, and the bank ledgers directly onto the glass coffee table. "I need everyone to hear something," I announced. My voice did not shake once. "A letter from Grandpa Arthur. He penned this 3 weeks before his heart gave out. Nobody in this room bothered to tell me he was in hospice." My mother's face drained of all color. "Amaryllis, this is highly inappropriate." I continued, ignoring her. "He had terminal pancreatic cancer. He begged Richard for 10 minutes to say goodbye to me before he died." Aunt Margaret gasped. "Arthur passed away? 3 years ago?" I picked up the thick cream paper and began reading aloud. "Your father legally forced me out of your life when you were 13. I told him he was destroying you by comparing you to Clara every single day. I wrote, I called. Your parents ensured you never touched a single envelope." I looked up from the paper. The entire room was staring in absolute shock. I kept reading. "When you were accepted into the social work program, I established a blind trust, $60,000. Richard told you they took out a parent loan," I read aloud, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "It was my money. They stole it from you." Clara dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, red wine bleeding into the expensive rug. "What?" she whispered. I didn't answer her. I pulled out my phone, synced it to the massive Bluetooth speaker sitting on their granite mantelpiece, and hit play on the 3rd audio file. Arthur's raw, dying voice ripped through the silent room. "Amaryllis, it's Grandpa Arthur. The oncologist says I don't have much time left. I begged your father to let me see you. They said you were too busy. I am so sorry I wasn't there. I love you. I always will. Until my heart stops, and long after." The file ran for almost 5 minutes. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. When the recording finally clicked off, the only sound left was the crackling fire in the hearth. I turned slowly to face my parents. On Christmas Eve, a commercial snowplow crushed my car on the mountain. I needed emergency surgery to survive. The trauma surgeon called you. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "Do you remember exactly what you told her?" Evelyn's hands started to shake violently. "Amaryllis, please, not right now." "You told her, we will come if she expires. We are not canceling the annual gala. You had 80 people drinking champagne in this exact room while I bled out on an operating table." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. 80 people came to your party, I said. I woke up in the intensive care unit completely alone. 0 visitors. But Grandpa actually showed up. My father stepped forward, his face pale. "Arthur is dead, Amaryllis. What are you talking about?" His attorney showed up, following the exact legal instructions Arthur left behind to protect me when I finally needed it. Grandpa paid my medical bill, $140,000. A man who had been dead for 3 years cared more about whether I lived or died than the 2 people who brought me into this world. My father clenched his jaw. "You do not understand the broader financial implications. Grandpa left me the Pine Ridge cabin, $850,000. He left me his liquid accounts, $600,000. He left me his chronometer. I held up the silver watch, and he made damn sure I would find out exactly what you did." I threw the thick stack of probate documents onto the glass table.
You were legally notified of this inheritance in January 2023. You hid it from me. For 2 solid years you knew, and when I almost died in that wreck, you still didn't come. My mother actually started crying then, real, heavy tears ruining her expensive makeup. We were just trying to protect you, sweetie. Protect me? From what? From actually being loved? I pulled a single white envelope from my coat pocket and dropped it next to the flash drive. It contained a note I wrote earlier that afternoon. The cabin is mine. The accounts are mine. The watch is mine. You cannot legally touch a single cent of it. And I am officially done pretending we are a family. Merry Christmas. I stood up straight and looked around the room one final time. If any of you want the actual truth about Arthur Vance, Elias Thorne's office number is on that card. He has the receipts, the hidden emails, the returned birthday cards, 15 years of hard evidence. I turned back to Evelyn and Richard. Enjoy your gala.
I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I stopped right at the threshold and looked back over my shoulder. Oh, and Evelyn, you texted me asking if I was bringing anything to the party. I brought the truth. I hope it tasted good. I walked out into the freezing night air. I didn't slam the door, I just pulled it shut quietly and walked away. When I got into my rental car, I could hear my mother loudly sobbing through the thick brick walls. I heard men yelling. I didn't look back. I just turned the ignition. The silver watch against my chest kept ticking. Steady. Reliable. Exactly the way Arthur was. The fallout was brutal and immediate. Clara called me 3 days later. I let it ring. She left a frantic 9-minute voicemail. Amaryllis, I had absolutely no idea. I swear to God. Dad lied to me too. If you want to talk, I am here. I never called her back. My father sent a massive email. The subject line was, "We need to handle this privately." The body of the message blamed Arthur for being mentally unstable, claimed they were shielding me from his toxic manipulation, and accused me of trying to humiliate them. I marked it as read and blocked his email address permanently.
My mother tried texting me from an unknown number. Your father is having severe chest pains from the stress you caused him. Are you happy now? I blocked that number immediately. But Aunt Margaret reached out. And my cousins from Chicago, they all repeated the exact same thing. We had no idea. We are so sorry. On February 2nd, I officially changed my phone number. I gave the new digits to Clara, one final chance to have a sister, and to Margaret. I explicitly kept it from my parents. On February 10th, I moved out of my damp Aurora basement and drove up to the Pine Ridge cabin. 3 bedrooms, 2 massive stone fireplaces, and a wall of windows looking over the snow-covered valley. Arthur's heavy wooden furniture was exactly where he left it. His worn paperbacks lined the shelves. A framed photograph of him and my grandmother sat on the mantel. In the hallway stood a massive grandfather clock. It was still ticking. I unpacked my boxes slowly. I hung my coats next to his old flannel jackets. I put my psychology textbooks beside his novels. I stood in the center of the living room, staring out at the frozen pines, and I felt something I had not experienced in over a decade. I felt safe.
That exact same afternoon, I drove down to Denver to meet with Elias Thorne. I want to establish a permanent grant fund, I told him, sitting across his mahogany desk. The Arthur Vance Memorial Foundation, specifically for social work students and shelter volunteers who are estranged from their families or aging out of the foster system. Elias smiled. How much seed money? $200,000 to start. The foundation officially launched in March.
managed by a local community trust. We set it up to provide 5 grants a year, $10,000 each. We heavily prioritized applicants who worked overnight shifts, kids without safety nets, and teenagers whose parents threw them out. Our very first recipient was 19-year-old Maya Lin. Her parents kicked her out onto the street the day she came out as queer. She had been crashing on a friend's couch, working double shifts at a diner, and just got accepted into the CU Denver social work program. I met her at a loud, crowded coffee shop downtown on March 15th. "I cannot thank you enough for this," Maya said. She kept twisting her napkin, looking terrified and overwhelmingly grateful. "I read the article about your grandfather's trust. I am so sorry you had to experience that."
"You don't need to apologize to me, Maya," I said, sliding my coffee cup aside. "And you certainly don't have to thank me. Arthur left this money specifically so it could catch people like you before you hit the pavement. People like us." Maya looked down at the table. "My parents swore I would never survive the social work program. They told me I was way too sensitive, too soft." I smiled. I thought about the youth shelter. I thought about the freezing highway, the shattered glass, and the cold hospital room. I thought about my mother telling the surgeon she would only come if I died. "Being sensitive isn't a weakness," I told Maya, looking her dead in the eye. "That means you actually feel the world. That is exactly what makes you strong enough to save people." Maya wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled back. I walked out of the coffee shop an hour later. The Denver spring air was finally starting to warm up. I pulled my jacket tight against the wind. I pressed my hand against the silver watch resting over my collarbone. I felt the steady, relentless ticking against my skin. It never stopped, just kept moving forward, like time, like love. Empathy makes us the best advocates. We absorb the fear these kids carry. We hold our ground when it gets ugly. Don't ever let someone convince you that feeling too much is a defect. The Denver Post picked up the story a week later. The Sunday headline read, "Youth Worker Funds Grant for Disowned Students in Grandfather's Memory." The reporter briefly touched on my own shattered family ties and Arthur's covert financial backing. They closed the piece with a direct quote from my interview. "My grandfather proved to me that family has absolutely nothing to do with genetics. It is entirely about who stands in your corner when the floor drops out. We created this fund for the kids who learned that brutal truth firsthand and refused to give up anyway." The community response was staggering. The donations crashed the foundation's website on the first day. $50 here, $2,000 there. By the end of April, the trust swelled past $250,000. Clara texted me on April 20th. "I read the Denver Post article. It made me cry. Grandpa would be so incredibly proud of the woman you became. I wired $2,000 to the fund this morning. I desperately want to be a better sister. Could we please get a cup of coffee?" I stared at the blinking cursor for 10 minutes. Finally, I typed, "Maybe. I need a lot more time right now, but maybe."
I finally returned to my overnight shifts at the Safe Harbor Youth Shelter on April 25th. Full duty, 9 to 7. My first night back on the floor, we had a packed house. One of the intakes was a 14-year-old girl named Sadie. Police found her freezing at a bus station that afternoon. Her mom was completely out of the picture. Her dad promised to pick her up from the precinct, but he just never bothered to show. The state couldn't assign her a caseworker until the morning. Around midnight, I walked past the girls' dormitory. Sadie was sitting wide awake on her narrow cot. She looked absolutely terrified. The radiator hissed loudly in the corner of the dark room. "Is my dad coming?" she whispered into the dark. I walked in and sat quietly on the cold linoleum floor right next to her bed. "He couldn't make it tonight, Sadie, but I am right here. My name is Amaryllis.
She pulled her thin blanket all the way up to her chin. "Are you gonna go home?" "I am not going anywhere until the sun comes up. You have my word on that."
Sadie leaned over the edge of the cot and pointed at my chest. "That is really cool necklace." I reached up and touched the silver pocket watch hanging from its heavy chain. I smiled at her. "Thanks. My grandfather gave this to me. He wanted to remind me that someone is always keeping time for the people they care about." I popped the silver casing open and held it up so she could see the antique face. "Do you see that tiny second hand moving? It never hesitates. It just keeps pushing forward, just like I won't stop sitting right here tonight." She let out a long, shaky breath. "Can you just stay until I close my eyes?" "Absolutely." I pulled my knees up to my chest, leaned back against the concrete wall, and quietly read a beat-up paperback copy of The Hobbit under the dim hallway light. She was fast asleep by 12:45 a.m. I stayed on the floor, listening to the old radiator hum in the background. I looked down at the silver chronometer resting in my palm. The second hand swept across the faded Roman numerals. Tick, tick, tick. My parents told a trauma surgeon they would only drive up the mountain if my heart stopped beating. Arthur showed up for me even after they bolted the doors and threw away the keys. I figured out a massive truth in that freezing hospital bed on Christmas Eve. It is the exact same truth I am trying to teach Sadie tonight, and every single runaway who wakes up terrified on my watch. Family is not the group of people who reluctantly show up to watch you die. It is the person who fights like hell to ensure you never feel abandoned while you are actually living. An old man in a corduroy chair taught me that. He taught me through 15 years of forced silence, through returned birthday envelopes, hidden tuition payments, intercepted voicemails, and a legally binding document that simply said, "You were loved, you are loved, you were never the problem." Every single time I check this watch, I remember the truth. I was fiercely loved when I felt invisible. I was violently protected when I couldn't see the shield. I was never alone. Nobody from that Boulder estate drove to the hospital when my car was crushed into scrap metal, but I am still breathing, and that is enough.